Hi creator friends, this is Cathy from Easy Sunday Club. On our YouTube channel, we make videos on practical business strategies, how-tos, and watercolor tutorials. Today, it is time for another watercolor tutorial. I'm going to show you how I paint this cactus in my loose watercolor style. This is advanced beginner stage, so you should understand the basics of how watercolor works and have used watercolor before, but I'm going to show you how I built out these layers from this saguaro cactus as well as this prickly cactus. The techniques I use are a little different, but I thought this is a fun piece to practice your watercolor. Okay, have fun, let's get into it. Alright, so I have here a very light sketch of a saguaro cactus on the right and a prickly pear on the left. It kind of frames this art nicely. Don't worry too much about sketching it to look like mine. It's more important that you just observe how I approach this. So my first step is I'm gonna lay down a foundation layer, a base layer for the saguaro cactus. I am mixing sap green with some yellow ochre because I want some of that golden color to pop from the bottom. This looks pretty good. I'm just gonna very liberally lay it down. Okay, so while I'm waiting for this layer to dry, I'm gonna move on to the saguaro cactus, to the prickly pear. And my approach here is a little different. Here I'm building layers on top of each other. Here I'm gonna work on blending of colors as I go. So there's gonna be a lot of gradients and different washes. I have here several shades of green from my paint set. This is a Japanese brand. It's Kurotake Gamzai something. I'll link it in the description below, but I have the 36 color set. I love this. This is, as you can see, well loved. I've used it a lot, but I also, because I really like the green paint in here, they have a really nice selection, a variety of greens, so I just pulled out the paint cakes for the greens, the yellow ochre, and some purple. It's kind of a purple crimson mix because I like to add hints of purple in my cactus painting. So you'll see. But first, it doesn't really matter what green I start with. I'm just gonna start with one. My water to paint ratio is low, so the paintbrush is wet, but I'm loading a lot of paint here. And let's go with this one. So I am applying the paint on dry paper. I'm rinsing it off to create a nice gradient here. And while this is still wet, I'm gonna apply a little bit of purple here where the bulbs join with one another. And I'll pick another green. You have to work kind of fast here because the paint will dry. So as I'm doing this part, I'm looking over here and say to myself, okay, I gotta get to that part before it dries, because I want to continue on with the color gradient. So I'll come back to this, and then for here I'm gonna do a more drastic change, so I'm using this forest green here. And just pulling it up while it blends with the other green. Rinse the brush, and I'm just now pulling everything up so that it still gets a nice light base layer. And add a little hint of yellow ochre, sap green That's where the light hits, so I'm gonna add the hints of gold and yellow ochre where I think the light will hit. So I'll leave that for now. I do like the wash here, and I'll come down and work on this. I want you to have fun with this process. Like, this is really about color exploration and just being confident, building your confidence and building these different color gradients without overthinking it. I mean, that's the beauty of loose watercolor paint. Loose watercolor painting style, especially when you're painting something like plants. You know, you have your sort of like constraints, which is, you know, you want to use blues and greens, mostly greens, some yellows. And once you have your color palette down, just experiment with different combos. So what I did there by accident, I had a brush mostly with water, and I was going to try to soften the hard edge, but instead I've created this nice cauliflower bloom. I actually really like this part. I don't know if I want to cover it, but I'm gonna leave it there for now. And it looks like the purple part is lightened up a bit, so apply some more. All right, so let's move on to the next part. Which green haven't I used? This is kind of a grass green. It's a little too green for me. I'm gonna add a little bit of, let's do a little blue. Okay, this is a nice change from the greens that I had here. And again, pulling it up. Here I'm dropping in the color and these, dropping in a new shade of green in these light tabs. Here I can tell that I'm using a little too much water because I can tell the paint is going to dry much lighter than what you see here, but that is okay. Even though we're building these dimensions as we go, I can still add another layer. Oops. Sometimes I don't even think about it when I'm dipping my brush in a paint color. I can always, there's always an opportunity to course correct if I pick the wrong color. They say watercolor is unforgiving because it dries and you can't just cover it up, but you actually can. And it's, you know, it doesn't dry right away, so you can always correct it. Okay, so while these edges are still wet, I'm gonna try another technique, which is I'm gonna load my brush with paint, so not a lot of water. I've already rinsed it. And I'm just go in, touch the edge of this, let it flow down a bit, and now I'm gonna pull it up. So now you can see the connection between the two. I'm gonna just call it bulbs. I don't know if that's scientifically correct or botanically correct, but I'm just gonna do that. And right here too, I'm gonna use another shade of green. Sometimes if you feel like you have too much paint on your brush, you can just even it out a little bit. And do the same thing here. Now this is another way you can take advantage of the watercolor medium, of the flowy nature of it, and just let it flow in whichever direction you want it to. And so I'm just gonna use existing paint mixes I have here and finish it off on top. And a little bit of yellow or gold right here as well. introduce the purple here. Not too much, because if you mix purple and yellow, you might get brown, but I don't think we have that to worry about here. Let's tie it all together with another green. Okay. So I did sketch out some cactus flowers here, and these are, I don't know, they're pre-bloom cactus flowers. These are already bloomed. So while this is wet, I do want to use this opportunity to add in the cactus flowers. So I'm mixing cadmium red with a bit of opera red, which is kind of a pinkish color, but I'll use mostly cadmium red. Let's see if this is dried already. So it's pretty dried, right? Even though I'm touching the top of this, it's bleeding out a little bit, but not too much. And usually the bulb is still mostly green, so I'm just gonna add in the green here. And halfway through the bulb. Okay. And let's move on to the flowers. Here I'm using almost a dry brushing technique, so I have a size 1. It might be a 0. Thin brush, and just taking these light strokes outwards. See, because the golden part is not completely dried yet, some of it is blooming out to the flower, and that's actually the effect I was going for. If I want them separated, then I would have waited till this layer is completely dried to apply the flower, the red, but here I want the effect of them blending in with each other. And last flower down here. I add a little hint of brown at the base, the shadow. Okay, that's good enough. Okay, I think I'm gonna add a third bulb here. It looks like that has lightened up quite a bit, so I'm gonna make this a small bloom of a flower, and the other ones are still closed. Okay, so I'll leave it for now. Looking at this side, it's looking pretty good, right? Like you can tell I'm obviously painting a cactus. It's still looking a little flat, so I'll come back to this later. Let's work on this saguaro cactus. So I'll go back to my size 8 brush again. By the way, this is a Raphael brush. I really like this brand, synthetic, so it's not super expensive. It's bouncy, it holds water, but not a whole lot of water. And I use size 8 brush probably the most, size 8 or 10. So for this one, I want it to be more of a turquoise, like this color. I want that to be the dominant color with, you know, supporting colors of green and purple. So to make that color, I think I have one from this palette already. But if you don't have it, that's not it. You can just mix some greens with blues to make your own shade of turquoise. Teal. nice dark turquoise. It's more green than blue, but that's kind of what I want. Okay, so for this side, I'm gonna take strokes upwards to create these grooves of the saguaro cactus. I'm just gonna go for it. The first stroke is gonna look very shocking, but just keep going. And then here, I'm gonna start doing some color transfer. Green here, and I'm going from the bottom up instead of top to bottom because the darker I want the bottom to be darker, since you know the light does hit from the top. Let's try another green mixed with blue. So they're all in the same similar color family. So it doesn't look too weird, but it really brings up the whimsiness of a cactus painting when you're experimenting all these different shades of green. And that's something I think a cactus can get away with, but a lot of other plants can't. At least I think so. I'm gonna start to introduce purple here too. Have a little bit of crimson added to this purple. Looking pretty good. So you see the bottom layer, the sap green greenish gold is starting to be taken over, right? But then it's still, to me, it's still better than white. And I'll reinforce it later too. I just want to wait for these layers to dry. Oh, I haven't used this. It's almost like aquamarine color, like a mint. Yeah, sure, let's try one. Don't be afraid of mistakes. At the end of the day, it's a piece of paper, and you learn better, faster this way. I do feel guilty though if I waste a lot of paper. I try to use the backside for other things, like if I want to do color tests, other sketches, stuff like that. And that's why I conceptualize a lot of my paintings in my head before I start sketching, because I do have that guilt of, you know, using a paper that isn't put in good use. So by now you'll see my pattern going from bottom to the top. I'm not trying to make perfect lines because that's not what nature is about. And I'm just leaving a little bit of space between each stripe. On the edge. If you find your paintbrush, I was gonna say toothbrush. If you find your paintbrush is too thick to make these thinner lines, or you're still practicing your command of, you know, using the tip of the brush, you can always switch to a thinner brush. So this looks good. I'm actually gonna go in and add more of the gold in different places. Just looking pretty good. And make sure you have a high, like a contrast of values, right? Some of my strokes are really dark. So what you want to do is just make sure that you're loading the brush with enough paint. Because if you feel like you're loading too much paint, like, you know, right here, let's see, right here, you can always save it by, or fix it by taking a rinsed brush and just pull the color out. It's like you're making sure that the paint will, you know, have enough area coverage. All right, so this one's too perfect. Now I need to mess it up on purpose. Purple. Okay, and there's one more here, and we are done. Overall, this is looking not teal enough to me, so I'm gonna go back to making that teal color more, adding more indigo to make the blue more intense, and just go in here. Saguaro to Cactus is looking pretty good. I'll leave this for now. Sometimes when I don't look at it, come back later, I might see something else, because I don't want to overdo it. Sometimes you can't see clearly if you're staring at a painting for too long. Okay, going to the left side. Let's start to put in those thorns. So first thing I'm gonna do is mix. It's a brown Van Dyke, very dark, warm dark brown with sepia, so almost like a light black color paint, and I'll just go in and actually, you know what? Next thing I'm gonna do is apply another layer because I want these black thorn to bleed into the background a little bit. Let me just show you how. Take any of these puddles of green, actually, and go in and just add a layer here. These will have more blunt edges when they dry, and that's okay. I think that's what brings out the dimensionality of the cactus. So you don't want to overwork these layering of colors. I'm on my second layer only, but I use more paint than water, so it does tend to look pretty dark already, and I don't think I want to add more layers than this. But just make sure you don't overwork, because you're working on transition of one color to another while building transitions on top of transitions, so you don't want to make it look too marbly. And I'm not super thoughtful with my color choices here. I just want them to have nice transitions. See, the bloom here, it looks so much different now when it dries. Before it was just a tiny piece. So I'll actually try to recreate this. It's looking pretty good. So while the top layers are almost dried, I'm going to start adding in the thorn with the base first. So it's basically dots that I'm trying to add into on top of the layer that I just applied, but I want to do it while the paper is still wet. So not completely dry, but also not so wet that this dot is just gonna go nuts. Okay, so I've added these dots all over. You can see they're soft dots because the layer beneath it wasn't completely dried. It was more damp. You don't want it to be too wet that it doesn't show up and it'll just create this crazy puddle. You want it to be damp. While I'm waiting for this to dry, I might start working on this again. This looks pretty dried. I actually need this to be completely dry before I do the last step, which is to add the thorn. So I think this is ready for some thorn application. So what I'll do is take the smallest brush I have. You can also use a brush with really thin tip. The ones with like a long, I don't know, a long belly. Or you can use a tiny brush like this too. This gives you more control. And my thorns. In real life, some of these thorns are white. They're like lighter color, but I'm not able to do that here. To do that with watercolor, you would have to apply masking fluid first, and you know that wasn't my approach here, so I'm just gonna go with a brown, a blackish brown, so more like sepia. Okay, this is looking good. Let's see if this is ready for action. Yep, and it is. See, some of these dots are too blunt. I don't want it to look like it's a pot or like a crater. I want it to look more like a shadow. Okay. This is looking pretty good to me. I may want to go in and just perfect a few areas here. Like, I think this part here, it's a little too light. I'll go add some accent. And maybe this one needs some extra reinforcement of purple. At this point, I think I'm done. All right, here's the cactus piece. Even this palette looks like a really abstract a cactus plant with the flower here. That was completely unintentional, but so I hope you enjoyed that tutorial of this cactus piece. Keep practicing, you'll get better at it. Let me know in the comments below, what did you like about the tutorial? What would you like things to be explained differently? What other subjects you wanted to see me paint in this loose watercolor style in the future? Please subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. Give us a thumb up if you enjoy this, and I'll see you next time.